So one of the kids I used to work with used to go to the library all the time, and we usually just went to do their scavenger hunts and play with their Legos, but one time there was one mother who was very upset about a book in the children's section. Since she was so upset, she was very loud, so I managed to overhear the book that she was upset about, which was called Mama, Mommy, and Me in the Middle, where a child obviously has two moms. And you know what's even better about this book? It's not even about gay relationships. When the woman left, the high schooler that she was screaming at just put it back on the shelf. So I grabbed it and read it real quick. It's about a kid who misses her mom because her mom went off to the military and she wants her mom to return so she can sit in between her moms and hug them again. The lady kept calling the library woke, predatory, and a few more adjectives that I was surprised she was very comfortable using in front of her young child. For even just having these books in the first place, these kinds of parents are so closed-minded that they end up controlling the narrative and weaponize it out of fear and rage. A while back, I was working with a single-digit aged kid who was struggling with pronouns. Specifically, he was mixing up first and second person pronouns. So if I asked him, do you want me to open it or do you want to open it yourself? He might say me to open it when he meant I want you to open it, or do it yourself when he meant I want to do it myself. It's a very common language delay that we see with some kids. When that happens, we don't really worry about third person pronouns too much, like he, she, or they, because kids can often just use names. But first and second pronouns are more important for building functional communication, so we work on them early. When I brought this up with the parents, both American-born, English-speaking, I could tell that they were really uncomfortable. They told me they didn't think it was appropriate to be teaching pronouns and wanted to wait until their child was 18. At first, I was really confused until I realized that they were probably associating pronouns as a political buzzword, like with all the gender identity debates that are everywhere right now. I know that a lot of parents are overwhelmed and are trying to protect their kids from things they don't fully understand, but it was very frustrating to have to explain that I was talking about basic grammar, something that most of us learned in second grade in America. It just reminded me how easily fear or misinformation can get in the way of helping a child learn or grow. I've been seeing some recent news of parents and politicians who label teachers and educators who educate students on consent and safe sex as pedophiles. And you can probably tell who's extremely out of touch of what childhood is like. Believe it or not, but your childhood is not actually just learning what could harm you, like learning not to run with scissors, but also learning about who could harm you. People who oppose this kind of lesson will never be interested in actually protecting kids because they're just controlling what their kids are allowed to learn, especially if that knowledge empowers them to be able to say no. I've already talked about what happens when traditional guardians prioritize being polite over the comfort of their child's bodies. So when I watched Matt Walsh's video calling a children's book about learning consent woke and inappropriate because it sexualizes familial touching, you can probably imagine how angry I got over it.
Grandma wants a hug, but Finn isn't in the mood. That's okay, says Dad. You don't have to give hugs if you don't want to. Grandpa leans down to kiss Finn. Mom says, please ask for consent first. Grandpa asks, may I kiss you on the cheek? Finn replies, yes, you may. Auntie and Uncle want Finn to sit with them. Come sit on my lap. No, you have to sit on my lap. Finn says, no, thank you. My parents say I don't have to sit on anyone's lap if I don't feel like it. What a brat this kid is. Mom's friends give Finn a present. Does that mean he has to hug or kiss that person? Only if he wants to. Maybe Finn could high five or fist bump instead. Or maybe he doesn't want to be touched at all. It's his choice what happens to his body. Finn is happy to see his best friend Rue. He asks, may I hold your hand? It is okay for you to say no. Rue replies, yes, you may hold my hand. Thank you for asking first. And that's it. That's the end of the whole story. Somewhat surprisingly, this is the worst one yet, I think. This somehow manages to be more disturbing than books that are pushing transgenderism and bisexuality and all that kind of stuff. I can't imagine if I was a little kid, if I was like 6 years old, and my grandmother came to visit and said, hey, give me a hug. And I said, nah, I don't feel like it, Granny. I cannot imagine what my dad's reaction would have been. It would not have been pleasant, I can tell you. My reaction with my own kids wouldn't be pleasant. I violate my kids' consent all the time in the sense that I force them to do things they don't want to do. My kids know that when a family member comes over to visit, you go and give them a hug. It's not an option, it's not a choice. You are required to do that. The major problem here is that the book explicitly sexualizes physical contact between family members.
No, Matt, if you were a normal human being, instead of being a talking conservative puppet with an arm up your you'd be able to know that it simply says that kids should be allowed to decide who touches them and who doesn't. How in the world is that woke? Yes, Matt, we know that Uncle Matt asking for a hug isn't inherently inappropriate. But you know what else isn't inappropriate? A child saying no to that hug. Teaching kids that their discomfort matters keeps them safe because statistically over 90% of kids who are sexually abused are abused by someone they know and trust, which unfortunately includes family. Early age-appropriate consent education empowers children children to recognize boundaries, trust their instincts, and speak up even in non-sexual situations. If the adult they're saying no to is well-adjusted and doesn't need the validation of a child, they will say, okay, thank you for telling me, and not throw a tantrum because, oh my god, they're being so rude. A lot of my family is extremely traditionally conservative. I don't visit home that often, but once when I did, one of my family members told their daughter to give me a hug. She looked very obviously uncomfortable, probably because I'm basically a stranger because, as I said, I don't visit home that often. So I suggested a high five instead and gave the excuse that I was sweaty and gross, so I didn't want to hug anybody. My family members laughed and their daughter excitedly jumped to give me a high five, so now she doesn't have to hug me, and if she remembered what I said, she can use my excuse if she needs to later because now she knows that her parents will just laugh it off if she says something like that. Because denying familial touching doesn't have to be rude if you're kind, creative, and or know how to socialize. When people like Matt Walsh mock the concept of bodily autonomy at an early age, it sincerely doesn't seem like they're protecting kids from grooming when they're literally grooming them to stay silent when something actually goes wrong. I know my audience is mostly progressive and democratic, but please don't generalize conservatives or Republicans for being like Matt Walsh, because half of the comment section that was mostly conservative in that video was criticizing this take. People from both parties know that teaching children about consent isn't predatory, so how the is Matt Walsh this dense about a politically agreeable topic? I think it's actually because it connects to the topic of safe sex. There are a lot of traditional, usually religious people who draw a line around specifics of sex, as in, oh, I don't want to go too in depth with what safe sex is like, but I'm fine with teaching my kid how to say no. Matt Walsh is a conservative bobblehead who shakes his head when his Daily Wire daddies say so. He can't draw a line because his whole internet personality is to be the most extreme, unwavering, knee-jerk reactionary in his space. His brand isn't and has ever been about protecting children or preserving traditional values, because teaching children how to say no is both a traditional purity culture value thing and also protects children. But he doesn't care because his traditional ideals is teaching children to say no when he wants them to. His political stance demands that children remain obedient, agreeable, and physically available for the comfort of adults, even when it makes them uncomfortable, which ironically enough describes grooming, which is what he claims the book does. I'm extremely late to the party, but I know that conservatives were talking about certain books getting banned around a year ago. I was watching a conservative talk about an LGBTQ plus book that was being banned from school libraries a couple months ago. He was saying that he doesn't want to ban books period, but they just shouldn't be in school libraries, which sure, I can get behind that. There are a lot of books that don't belong in school libraries. As a professional that deals with annoying parents, I can understand why parents are upset because they want to shield stuff from their kid due to them equating expressive LGBTQ plus identities to being inappropriate. Do I agree with it? No, not in the slightest, but I understand. However, I get incredibly annoyed when parents, more specifically usually MAGA parents, accuse the authors of being pedophiles. I've said before, I think it's weird to bring up LGBTQ plus topics to a kid or teenager that obviously doesn't care. But if a teenager wants to read a book called This Book is Gay, which is basically a guide for ages 14 and older that teaches about concepts like coming out, relationships, sex education, and queer history, I feel like it's fine to talk about queer topics at that point. One of the points that he brings up that the book is obviously not for kids is because it quotes adults. What the fuck do you want it to do? Quote minors? Did you know that when you invert the colors often used in the Mandalorian symbol background in Star Wars, it looks just like the transgender flag? Kai, age 14, California. One criticism that he had for this book was towards the end where it tells you what Grindr is and how to use it. But the book is gay though. Grindr is famously known to be part of the gay and trans community, which apparently he doesn't like because there's trans men on there. Men in men's spaces. Ironically enough, he didn't mention the straight cis women on there. Including Grindr was supposed to keep the conversation about LGBTQ plus experiences real and relevant, offering practical and contemporary advice for teens in a way that respects their maturity and experiences. Despite what parents might think, teenagers know about dating apps. They have the internet. The biggest critique was the book covered gay sex. I'll admit, I was a bit surprised by how much detail this book goes into, but the book is gay, so to be completely honest, I'd much rather have my gay son learn about how to have safe, consensual gay sex from a picture book over the non-consensual and unsafe resources that I learned from. My friends and I learned about sex from weird websites, pop-ups, and older kids who didn't know much more than we did. And I know that's still happening considering when I was at work some middle schoolers were watching at the park. Kids will eventually learn about it, and you'll be very surprised at what kids can get away with by bypassing filters on their devices. Real professionals like teachers, psychologists, and sex educators defend this book not because they're predatory, but because this book provides age-appropriate, accurate information to young people who may not otherwise have access to reliable resources. There are so many LGBTQ plus teenagers who feel isolated isolated and confused, and a book that explains their experiences and offers information about relationships, identity, and sexuality can help normalize those experiences. It's not a f***ing book. It's a non-fiction educational guide. Keeping these kinds of conversations hidden does more harm than good, because now your kid gets to learn from experience instead of learning from an educational book. They're 5, leave them alone. No, they're not. They're 14 and older. They can learn what sex is. This is the same argument that parents have made against another book called It's Perfectly Normal, which is intended for middle schoolers, typically ages 10 to 14. Even some progressives have agreed that it might be too much for schools, and honestly, I can understand why. This book is very graphic. It includes illustrations of genitalia, nudity, and depictions of sexual acts like masturbation and intercourse. They're not real pictures, they're just drawings. If those points resonated with you, you're absolutely allowed to agree with these concerns because this book is a lot. But from a professional standpoint, sex education is strongly recommended for kids in this age range because this book presents it in a very clear, science-based, and non-judgmental way. If a kid is curious but too nervous to ask their parents, they can turn to this book instead of going down a much riskier route online, as I said before. It's perfectly normal, exactly what child abusers say. The title is talking about puberty, growing up, and body changes, something that children experience. People keep saying that this should be an adults-only book, but adults have already gone through puberty. They should know this stuff already. High schoolers know this stuff already. It's for middle schoolers, not 5-year-olds. It does not normalize abuse. The book just goes into depth with what is healthy, appropriate, and expected as kids develop. The book explicitly distinguishes between safe, consensual touch and abuse, which is the exact opposite of what abusers want. This book is backed up by pediatricians, sex educators, psychologists, the American Library Association, and school districts nationwide. It is an age-appropriate, medically accurate sex education recourse. It is not a f***ing book because it's not a fictional tale, it's a non-fictional educational guide. If a book is not allowed on YouTube, it should not be in elementary and middle school libraries. Frankly, I don't think this point is debatable. Well, let me debate this point. YouTube is not a library. It's a private, ad-driven platform governed by advertiser guidelines, not educational standards. Content on YouTube is often restricted, not because it's inappropriate for kids, but because it's not brand safe. Book access and platform restrictions serve different purposes. Libraries curate materials based on what helps students grow intellectually, emotionally, and safely. YouTube demonetizes content to avoid upsetting advertisers because it'd probably be weird to put a burger ad after talking about puberty. If we applied this logic consistently, we'd have to ban books on racism, queer history, the Holocaust, and even mental health, because many of those topics are flagged or demonetized by algorithms. Are we really going to erase truth from classrooms because it makes brands uncomfortable? This kind of outrage happens every year with every book that covers any controversial topic that has an age rating of under 17 plus. There's this non-fiction book that's known to be one of the most frequently banned books in American history called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The book was primarily banned due to parents, school boards, and political groups labeling the book as predatory, inappropriate, and grooming. Considering the rest of the previous points of this entire video, can you guess what this book is about? This book, which was published in 1969, is basically a memoir of the author Maya Angelou, where she recites her experience of growing up in the South as a poor black woman, which includes the main theme of getting sexually assaulted when she was 7 years old. She connects her personal experience to the broader societal issues of racism, sexism, and poverty. After naming her abuser, who was later killed, Maya felt responsible and stopped speaking for 6 years. By the end, she learned to reclaim her voice and puts a spotlight on how shame and trauma can come from avoiding painful truths. She was one of the first black women to write openly about child sexual abuse from the perspective of the victim, because it was very taboo to openly discuss topics like that with children. Her book was too graphic, too anti-white, and too serious to be a children's book, despite the educational, honest, and important topics that resided in it, so it was continuously banned, unbanned, banned again, and unbanned again. So it's nice that we have this same conversation every year about a different book. I brought up pride flags in my last video when I was talking about GAG, aka Gays Against Grooming, and I want to expand on it here because I've seen so many parents lose their minds over pride flags in classrooms. The main argument is just pride flags shouldn't be in classrooms because the flag just represents sex and mutilating body parts, and obviously it will undoubtedly encourage kids to keep doing it. Kids don't turn queer because of a rainbow, I'm afraid. When I was in high school, there was a teacher who got in trouble for taking down the American flag and replacing it with the pride flag. That by itself isn't necessarily homophobic, homophobic, public schools are technically government property, and American flags are standard because students are expected to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. Non-Americans, yes, we know it's weird. You don't have to tell us. That's just the expectation. Even my criminal justice teacher, who was an ex-cop, wasn't allowed to swap it out for a police flag, which is literally just a grayscale American flag with one blue stripe. So fine, someone put up the pride flag over the American one, so just ask them to move the flag, easy solution. But there were so many parents screaming at the school district to fire them. And when the school didn't, they were furious that a school would support that groomer group. My school wasn't even progressive. I had a history teacher that was also a basketball coach who burned a BLM flag, but he got praised for free speech despite all the non-racist parents begging for a new teacher and coach. But he also didn't get fired and he still works there to this day. If you want to talk about pedophiles, I had a PE teacher that doubled as the varsity football team coach, and he texted one of the cheerleaders that was 16 at 3 in the morning, and he still works there because parents and the football team threw a fit when he was suspended. My high school district was just a fucking doormat for literally anything. To go into that second point of the pride flag represents body mutilation because they're trying to demonize trans healthcare. It's honestly so hard to take this point seriously when you consider how often irreversible medical decisions are made for children without any controversy until a certain pink and blue flag is involved. In the US, doctors still perform medically unnecessary surgeries on intersex children to make their anatomy more normal, often with irreversible lifelong consequences. And yet the companies and politicians who fearmonger about the so-called gender surgeries on kids aren't talking about these kids. They never are. Do you want to know who's talking about them? LGBTQ plus advocacy groups and human rights organizations, the same groups that get demonized in those Protect the Children campaigns. These groups are the ones fighting to keep intersex kids off the operating table until they can decide what's right for their bodies, because they value consent and long-term well-being. And that's what's so frustrating about these concerned parents. They claim that they're protecting children, but their outrage is so selective. I saw a video of some 12-year-old trans boy going under puberty blockers, and you could hear the parents say they'd go to Disneyland after that because they were handling it well. Transphobes freaked the fuck out because I can't believe they're letting children mutilate themselves and then rewarding them for it. Do people not know that there has to be multiple professionals, which include pediatricians, endocrinologists, and licensed therapists to make sure a kid is in the right mental state to be doing something like this, involved for kids to get puberty blockers and HRT? It's not the kids who are making the decisions. A young person might express their gender identity is different from what they were born as, and based on persistent, consistent, and insistent identification over time, medical professionals provide the family with age-appropriate options. These decisions are made carefully and always with the child's well-being in mind. I totally understand parents wanting to set boundaries for what their kids are exposed to. That's part of being a responsible parent. Some feel like middle school is too young for sex education, even though according to medical and educational professionals, middle school is actually exactly when kids should be learning about it because that's when puberty starts and kids have already begun to form ideas, or more accurately, misconceptions about bodies, relationships, consent, and identity. But still, I get where the concern comes from. Not to be a child abuser, but it's perfectly normal and in many cases necessary to shield your child from certain content. For example, I actually recommend that parents be cautious about Cocomelon. Pediatric experts and child development psychologists have certain concerns that the rapid scene changes, constant music, and a high sensory stimulation in shows like Cocomelon can overstimulate a toddler's brain, which can lead to shortened attention spans, increased irritability, emotional dysregulation, and even screen addiction in early childhood. You know what I don't do though? I don't call the creators pedophiles. Having a different idea of what's appropriate or helpful for your kid doesn't inherently make you a predator. The word pedophile used to mean something, so it really saddens me to see how casually and carelessly that word gets thrown around now. Teachers, librarians, authors, illustrators, therapists, psychologists, nurses, surgeons, doctors, specialists, just anyone who dares to support comprehensive sex ed or acknowledge that LGBTQ plus people exist gets slapped with the label pedo just because some parent wants to feel morally superior. And now it's so hard to actually give a shit about real pedophiles because, oh, everyone's just being dramatic, or everyone's so woke, or everyone's so invested with cancel culture, or everyone's just being anti-gay. Everyone is just so tired of hearing about the wolf that's never there every time we check, where every other accusation is just some paranoid parent screaming about a book that mentions two moms, or a kid learning what consent is, because they're throwing a tantrum over a world they can't control, mistaking their comfort for danger. But I don't know, that's just me. Laters.